It is 1942 and the desert is alive with war. Out there, engines roar, tracks grind, and dust rises in plumes that stretch for miles. The North African campaign is in full fury, and at its center, one man's name echoes through every Allied trench and transmission: Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Rommel's Afrika Korps moves like a living organism, fast, precise, unpredictable. They strike from the dunes and vanish before the British can react. In just 2 years of fighting, he has carved a legend across the Sahara, a general whose maneuvers defy logic, whose tanks appear where no road exists, and whose minefields swallow entire battalions. The British 8th Army, a force of men from Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, and the Free French, struggles to hold him back. Their commander, General Claude Auchinleck, calls it a war of endurance against the desert itself. Vehicles overheat, radios fail, water runs short, and always there are the mines, tens of thousands of them hidden beneath the sand, laid by German and Italian engineers with a surgeon's precision. They line the approaches to Tobruk, Mersa Matruh, and the Alamein line, invisible fences that bleed the momentum from every Allied assault. Each mine costs a few pounds of steel and powder, but clearing one costs lives. Sappers crawl on their bellies with bayonets, listening for the faint metallic click that means death is inches away. It is slow, maddening work. Even fake markers, disturbed sand, wooden stakes, the glint of wire, are enough to halt a column until engineers confirm the ground is safe. Fear becomes its own weapon, and Rommel uses it well. At a forward repair camp outside Tobruk, among the smell of diesel and the clatter of wrenches, Corporal Tommy Fletcher wipes the sweat from his brow. He is 28, a mechanic from Leeds who used to fix delivery trucks before the war. Now he repairs tanks under the same sun that melts the rubber from their tracks. Around him, rows of Shermans and Crusaders wait for replacement engines, their crews sheltering under torn canvas for shade. Fletcher watches another convoy roll in. Trucks towing crippled vehicles, one of them a Stuart light tank with its hull split open by an explosion. "Hit a mine," the driver mutters, eyes hollow. Fletcher nods. Everyone here knows that sound. The metallic pop, the instant flash, the fire. Mines do not just kill machines, they drain morale. They make every mile of desert feel cursed. Major Ralph Alger Bagnold, the commander of this sector's Royal Engineers detachment, visits the camp that evening. Tall, spare, sun-toughened, Bagnold is already a legend among desert men. Before the war, he was an explorer and scientist, the first to cross the Libyan desert by motorcar. He knows dunes the way sailors know tides. In 1940, he founded the Long Range Desert Group, the reconnaissance unit that raids deep behind Axis lines, mapping supply routes and gathering intelligence. When Bagnold speaks about the desert, men listen. That night, he tells his sappers, "Rommel fights with speed, yes, but he wins with deception. He makes us see danger where none exists." Fletcher hears those words and cannot forget them. He starts to notice things. Places marked as minefields on the maps that later prove empty. German tanks steering around harmless patches of sand because British flyers once bombed near them. The entire desert, he realizes, is built on illusion. In July 1942, when Rommel pushes east toward El Alamein, British patrols retreat across ground so empty it feels supernatural. The heat distorts the horizon, turning tanks into mirages and shadows into soldiers. Every line in the sand might hide a mine. Every mound might explode. Fear slows men more effectively than barbed wire. As the days drag on, Fletcher keeps seeing the same ritual: advance, stop, clear mines, mark lanes, advance again. Hours lost, fuel burned, lives risked. The enemy does not need to fight. The sand fights for him. Then, one afternoon, after a supply column halts for yet another suspected minefield that turns out to be nothing but disturbed ground, Fletcher laughs bitterly. "If empty sand can stop us," he says to a fellow sapper, Maybe it can stop them too. It begins as a joke, but the idea lingers. Fletcher is a mechanic. He solves problems with whatever he has. Scrap metal, wire, paint, patience. He knows how men read the desert. A few stakes, a pattern of tire tracks, a line of shallow pits. It all looks official from a distance. What if you built a minefield that didn't exist? When Major Bagnold next visits, Fletcher brings it up. Sir, what if we used fakes, empty petrol tins painted like mines, lay them in patterns, make it look right? They'd never risk driving through. Bagnold studies him for a long moment, his eyes narrow against the sun. You think you can fool Rommel's scouts? With the right details, yes, sir, Fletcher replies. The desert hides what you tell it to hide. Bagnold's lips curl into something between amusement and admiration. He has spent years studying how sand and light deceive the human eye. The idea fits perfectly with what he already believes, that in the desert, the difference between truth and illusion is measured in shadows. All right, Corporal, he says at last. Show me. That single sentence changes the rhythm of Fletcher's war. Over the next days he collects materials, empty fuel tins, bits of paint, old ration boxes, and begins experimenting behind the maintenance sheds. At first it feels absurd, like a child building castles in sand. But as the sun sets, he looks at the half-buried tins and the faint footprints around them, and even he feels a flicker of unease. From 50 yards away it looks real. From 100, it looks deadly. The next morning, a patrol passes the spot and stops cold. Radio chatter sparks. Engineers are called. Hours later, when they finally realize the ground is harmless, Fletcher is already grinning. It has worked, not because the fakes were perfect, but because men's instincts filled in what their eyes couldn't confirm. Bagnold watches quietly. Sometimes, he murmurs, it's the simplest tricks that change a campaign. The experiment will soon grow far beyond one corporal's curiosity. But for now, the desert holds its breath. Under the same sun that burns metal and blinds glass, a new weapon is born. One made not of steel or gunpowder, but of imagination. In this war of machines, a mechanic has just discovered the power of nothing. Night settles over Tobruk like a sheet of ash. The desert, which all day burns white, now cools into silence. Engines stop. Only the wind moves. Somewhere out beyond the perimeter, Rommel's guns test fire into the dark, long arcs of tracer light that hang and fade over the dunes. Corporal Tommy Fletcher crouches by the flickering light of a hurricane lamp, sketching on the back of a ration box. Circles, lines, crude diagrams of how he could arrange the fake mines. He's no engineer on paper, yet every tank he's repaired has taught him that the smallest piece, one misaligned gear, can halt an army. By dawn, he's already scavenging. Empty petrol tins from the depot, a can of black paint from the sign writers, a few wooden stakes. A junior sapper named George Peters helps him hammer the dents out of the tins. You really think the Jerrys will fall for this? Peters asks. They'll fall for what they expect to see, Fletcher says. He knows that the Germans mark their own minefields with identical warning stakes, skull and crossbone symbols, wire markers, disturbed earth. In the right light, nobody questions a familiar pattern. The human brain fills in danger where it wants to find it. When Major Ralph Bagnold inspects the morning's progress, he doesn't smile, but he doesn't stop them either. Bagnold has a scientist's curiosity. Years before the war, he had crossed the Libyan desert with Ford trucks, measuring how sand drifts form and move under wind. He knows illusion is as natural here as gravity. Carry on, Corporal, he says quietly. Just don't get shot before you prove your theory. That night, the experiment begins. Fletcher and 5 sappers load the tins into a Bedford truck and drive east, past the skeletons of burned-out vehicles. The dunes glow under moonlight, soft as silk and deadly beneath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Rommel's advance elements are probing for weak spots in the Alamein line. They stop near an abandoned trench line, flat ground, perfect visibility. Fletcher orders the men to dig shallow holes every few yards, bury a tin, smooth the surface, and stamp faint footprints across it. He drives the truck in a slow curve, letting the tires press a neat track that looks like engineers have just finished laying mines. Then, using the last of the black paint, he marks the wooden stakes with German warning symbols copied from a captured sign. By sunrise, 6 men and a few dozen scraps of metal have built a minefield that exists only in imagination. They leave before the Luftwaffe's morning patrols appear. From the British outpost a few miles west, Fletcher watches through field glasses as the day begins to shimmer. At first, there is nothing. Then, dust. German recon vehicles approach, cautious, halting, scanning the sand. They see the stakes. They see the track marks. They stop. An hour later, radio intercepts from Cairo pick up Luftwaffe chatter. New British mine belt sighted east of Ridge 227. Fletcher can hardly believe it. His absurd little project has already entered enemy intelligence. Rommel's armoured spearheads, expecting to find open ground, now divert south to skirt the supposed minefield. The delay gives the British precious hours to move artillery and reposition tank brigades. A single afternoon gained in the desert can mean survival. Bagnold calls Fletcher to headquarters. The old explorer's face is unreadable as he studies the report. Finally, he says, "You found a way to use the desert itself against him. Let's see how far imagination can go before the bullets catch up." Within days, Fletcher's Ghost Minefield becomes official experiment number 47 under Royal Engineers' supervision. Orders circulate quietly through the sappers' network. Prepare dummy fields along likely enemy approaches. Each requires no explosives, only tins, stakes, disturbed soil, and discipline. It's dangerous work nonetheless. German patrols shell anything that moves after dark. Fletcher's men dig by moonlight, shovels muffled with rags, headlights blacked out. They measure spacing exactly 30 feet apart, mimicking the pattern of a real defensive belt. A single misaligned row could break the illusion. The desert rewards precision. By mid-August 1942, the 8th Army's defensive zone around El Alamein bristles with both real and phantom obstacles. Intelligence reports from captured prisoners confirm that the Afrika Korps believes new minefields are heavily sown. In truth, half are empty sand. Fletcher's unit learns the rhythm of deception, a line of shallow pits, footprints leading away as if engineers had withdrawn, tire tracks cut cleanly across the surface, then disappear. The trick, he tells his men, is to give the enemy just enough truth to hang his doubt upon. When the first German Panzer column tests the line 2 weeks later, observation posts record exactly what Fletcher predicted. Tanks halt, engineers dismount, they probe, they dig, they waste an entire morning verifying safety. Then they radio back that the field is too fresh to risk. The convoy diverts again. The victory feels almost surreal. No shells fired, no casualties, only hesitation. But in a theater where movement decides everything, hesitation is lethal. One evening, Fletcher sits with Bagnold outside the tent as the desert cools. "Never thought the war would come down to empty tins," he says. Bagnold chuckles softly. "You've misunderstood the desert, Corporal. Nothing out here is ever truly empty." They watch the horizon glow faintly from artillery many miles away. For once, the sound feels distant. Fletcher knows his idea will not stay secret long. Sooner or later, the Germans will catch on. But right now, the Afrika Korps is fighting ghosts. By the end of the month, reports flow in from across the front. Dummy minefields halting columns near Mersa Matruh, forcing detours toward real traps, clogging narrow supply tracks with confusion. Rommel's staff estimates that the British have laid at least 600,000 mines around the Alamein position. The true figure is barely half that. In Cairo, senior officers debate whether to formalize the technique. Some call it a morale trick, others see its tactical brilliance. Air Marshal Arthur Tedder reportedly remarks, "If the enemy spends more time fearing what's not there, we've already won half the battle." For Fletcher, none of that matters. His satisfaction is simpler. He has watched men die clearing real mines. Now he watches enemy tanks stop short of fake ones. The equation feels balanced, if only for a moment. Every war produces its share of madmen and inventors, those who see beyond convention. In the heat of North Africa, a mechanic has joined their ranks. With a few scraps of metal and a sense of mischief, he has turned Rommel's own tactics of deception back against him. The desert wind rises again, erasing footprints, smoothing the sand until even Fletcher's handiwork disappears. Yet the fear remains, buried in every German mind that crosses this sea of dust, that somewhere beneath their tracks lies death. Even if the ground is empty, the terror is real. And that, Fletcher thinks, is victory enough. The desert never truly sleeps. Even at midnight it hums. The whisper of wind through dunes, the faint metallic tick of cooling engines. Out here, sound travels like thought. Men keep their voices low, as if afraid to wake the sand itself. It is late August 1942, and the moon has not yet risen over the El Alamein front. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, German reconnaissance units are searching for a new path toward the British lines. The Afrika Korps has stalled. Rommel's tanks are hungry for fuel, his men for rest, but still they search, probing for weakness. In the British sector, Major Ralph Bagnold studies a map spread across the bonnet of a Bedford truck. Thin pencil lines mark the front. Real minefields in solid ink, dummy ones in dotted red. The fake field drawn tonight will block a narrow gap between the Katara Depression and the Ruwaysat Ridge. If the Germans believe it's real, their advance will be forced north, straight into pre-sighted artillery. Bagnold looks up at Corporal Tommy Fletcher, whose face is half lit by the lamp. "You've made me a believer, Corporal. Let's see if imagination can hold a line." Fletcher nods. His small crew of sappers loads their equipment, empty fuel tins, paint, stakes, shovels, onto the truck. They drive without headlights, guided only by the glow of the stars. The air smells of dust and hot metal. Every bump could hide something lethal. When they stop, the silence is absolute. The desert feels infinite. Fletcher kneels and scoops up a handful of sand. It slides through his fingers, cool and fine like powder. This ground has already seen too much blood. Tonight it will taste none. He gives the order softly. "Let's make some ghosts." The men spread out, each pair working by touch and memory. They dig shallow pits every few yards, drop a tin in each, and brush sand over the top. Peters, the youngest sapper, carries a can of paint and marks the wooden stakes with crude black crosses. He laughs nervously. "Feels daft, painting death where there's none," Fletcher answers without looking up. "Daft or not, it might save us all." By 0300 hours, the line stretches nearly a mile. A truck runs slow parallel passes, leaving tire tracks to imitate supply vehicles. The men stamp boot prints in erratic clusters, then sweep over them with brushes to suggest movement. The trick is in imperfection. Perfect lines would look suspicious. As dawn approaches, Fletcher checks the work. From a ridge 100 yards back, the fake field looks flawless, scarred sand, painted stakes, and just enough disorder to feel genuine. Even knowing it's false, his stomach tightens when he looks at it. That, he thinks, is how the enemy will feel too. They withdraw before first light, leaving nothing behind but their footprints, which the wind soon claims. The following afternoon, the sky burns white again. Fletcher waits at an observation post carved into a ridge of limestone, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The desert beyond shimmers. For hours, nothing moves except the heat. Then faintly, he sees dust. A German column, armoured cars and half-tracks, approaches from the west. Through the haze, their movement is cautious, uncertain. He tracks them as they slow, halt, spread into reconnaissance formation. Officers dismount, scanning with field glasses. The first vehicle veers off, probing the ground. Then it stops. The others stop with it. From this distance, Fletcher can almost feel the tension, the unseen conversation between commanders, the suspicion tightening every decision. He turns to Bagnold. "They've seen it." The major's reply is barely a whisper. Now let's see if they believe it. Minutes stretch into an hour. Through the lenses, Fletcher sees the German engineers begin to probe with bayonets, stabbing the sand ahead of them, careful, methodical. Nothing happens, but they don't know that. The fear of one explosion is enough to freeze an army. Finally, the engineers mark the area with red flags and signal back to their column. The convoy turns slowly north, engines revving, retreating into the heat. Bagnold exhales a breath he's been holding for 10 minutes. That's it. They've taken the bait. It's a small victory, invisible, bloodless, yet decisive. Those extra hours will let the 8th Army reposition 2 artillery batteries and lay genuine mines further along the line. The illusion has bought time, and in this war, time is currency. That night, the men celebrate quietly over mugs of tepid tea. Peters jokes that maybe they should get medals shaped like empty tins. Fletcher only smiles. He's already thinking ahead. If one field fools a patrol, he says, a dozen might fool a whole division. Bagnold agrees. Within days, orders circulate to repeat the process along multiple sectors. Dummy minefields become a new defensive language, lines of fear drawn in sand. Real mines are laid sparsely to anchor the deception so that even if German engineers test one and find an explosion, they'll assume the rest are live. British intelligence officers intercept reports from German field units describing intensified British mining operations. They estimate mine density at more than double the actual number. Rommel himself, writing to his Chief of Staff on 10 September 1942, complains of an infernal maze of mines slowing all forward movement. Fletcher's ghosts are working. Still, the danger remains. Each new field must be laid at night, often within shelling range. A single flare could expose them. On 14 September, while setting markers near the Katara Depression, one of Fletcher's men, Private Hughes, is hit by shrapnel from a stray mortar. The blast tears his shoulder open but spares his life. Later, as medics bandage him, he tells Fletcher, "If the Germans knew we were planting nothing, they'd die laughing." Fletcher replies quietly, "Then let's make sure they never find out." The phantom minefields spread faster than the enemy can chart them. From the air, reconnaissance photos show identical scarring patterns to real fields. Even experts struggle to tell which are live. Allied aerial crews, briefed on the ruse, mark them with code letters. D fields, for dummy, to prevent friendly casualties. By late September, nearly a quarter of the British defensive belt consists of illusion. The Germans, unaware, expend days clearing sectors that contain nothing but wind-blown tins. Fuel shortages worsen. Convoys reroute through exposed terrain. Commanders grow cautious, afraid to gamble their dwindling reserves on uncertain ground. Every illusion amplifies the next. Fletcher's trick becomes part of the greater deception operation taking shape under the 8th Army's new commander, Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery. His staff will later call it Operation Bertram, a massive scheme of camouflage and feints that hides entire tank divisions behind fake supply dumps. But Fletcher's idea, small and improvised, is its first pulse. The war of shadows has begun. One evening in late September, Fletcher and Bagnold drive to a high ridge overlooking the western approaches. The wind smells of cordite and sand. Below them stretches the pale line of the most recent phantom field. The sun is setting behind it, turning the stakes into black silhouettes. Bagnold says quietly, "You know, Corporal, if this works during the coming battle, nobody will ever believe it was done with rubbish." Fletcher watches the light fade. Maybe that's how it should be, sir. The best tricks don't leave fingerprints. In a few weeks, the Second Battle of El Alamein will begin. Thousands of real mines will detonate, and thousands of fake ones will never need to. But tonight, in the stillness before that storm, the mechanic from Leeds stands at the edge of a battlefield he has reshaped, with imagination, alone. He looks at the endless desert and feels a strange kinship with it. Both of them made of silence, both capable of deception. The wind picks up, sweeping across the dunes. The fake stakes tremble, their painted crosses catching the last of the sun. From a distance, they look like warnings carved by ghosts, and perhaps, in a way, they are. For now, Rommel's army hesitates once more, staring into nothing and believing it is death. By October 1942, the desert has become a vast chessboard, every dune a square filled with secrets. From above, Allied reconnaissance sees nothing but shimmering emptiness, yet beneath the haze lies a pattern of genius and deceit. Across 50 miles of front, the British Eighth Army has woven an invisible wall of danger, part real, part illusion. Some of it is Corporal Tommy Fletcher's handiwork, multiplied 100-fold. He walks the lines at dawn, boots crunching over the crusted sand. Where others see a barren wasteland, he sees engineering. Every shallow pit, every scar of tire tread, every half-buried tin is a component in a greater mechanism. The desert itself has become a machine of misdirection. The technique spreads faster than anyone expected. Royal Engineer detachments across the front adapt it in their own ways. Some paint the tins black, others red. Some use flattened ration cans instead of fuel drums. From Alexandria to Mersa Matruh, every workshop scours the refuse piles for metal. Even the cooks contribute, sending empty tea tins and bully beef cans to the sappers. Nothing goes to waste. Each dummy minefield follows a rhythm. 200 yards of disturbed earth, then an untouched gap, then another band of pits and stakes. Between the belts, small real mines are laid, just enough to keep the lie alive if the enemy tests it. It is cheap, quick, and devastatingly effective. Reports from intercepted German signals show confusion. Luftwaffe photographs cannot distinguish real from false. Pilots complain that British camouflage has become mathematically perfect. In reality, the mathematics belong to men like Fletcher, mechanics turned illusionists armed with sand, shovels, and imagination. Major Ralph Bagnall documents the results meticulously. His scientific notebooks, once filled with equations of dune drift, now record the psychology of fear. The minefield, he writes, need not exist in metal or TNT. It exists in the mind that believes it. He sends the report to 8th Army headquarters, where a new commander reads it with keen interest. That commander is Lieutenant General Bernard Law Montgomery, recently appointed by Winston Churchill to replace General Auchinleck. Montgomery understands the value of deception. Since arriving in August, he has reorganized the army, preparing for a decisive offensive to drive Rommel out of Egypt. His staff studies every idea that can tilt the balance, and Fletcher's phantom minds catch their eye. Under Montgomery's orders, the technique becomes part of a grander plan, Operation Bertram. Its goal, convince Rommel that the main British attack will fall in the south, while the true blow strikes in the north. To do it, the Allies must lie on an industrial scale. Camouflage officers build dummy tanks from plywood, dummy pipelines of painted canvas, dummy supply dumps stacked with empty boxes. Fletcher's fake minefields now anchor this illusion. They are drawn on maps, briefed in intelligence reports, and even photographed for deception dossiers. What began as a mechanic's prank becomes a cornerstone of strategic warfare. For Fletcher, the transformation is dizzying. Only months ago he had been patching broken tracks under fire. Now his work is discussed in Montgomery's war room. Yet he keeps his humility. When Bagnall congratulates him, he only shrugs. "I just buried rubbish, sir." Bagnall smiles, and made the enemy dig their own graves to find it. In early October, Fletcher's section is tasked with creating one of the largest dummy belts of the campaign, 3 miles long across the Alamein approach, designed to appear newly mined from the air. They work for 4 nights under blackout, guided by starlight and the phosphorescent glow of compasses. The men move like ghosts, each shovel stroke muffled by sandbags to hide the sound. One evening, a flare bursts miles away and they freeze. For a moment, the desert blazes silver, every tin and stake casting a shadow sharp as a blade. If German aircraft are watching, the illusion could die before it lives. But the light fades, no bombs fall. Fletcher exhales. "Even the moon's on our side," he whispers. When dawn comes, the field is finished, a seamless blend of truth and lie. Allied aerial photographs show patterns indistinguishable from genuine defensive belts. Bagnold sends the images to headquarters. Montgomery writes a single word in the margin: excellent. As the deception builds, Rommel faces his own nightmare. Supplies from Europe dwindle. The Axis convoys across the Mediterranean are mauled by Allied submarines and aircraft. Fuel reserves fall to a fraction of what he needs. Every unnecessary detour, every cautious halt before a supposed minefield costs him irreplaceable petrol. Fletcher's ghosts are bleeding the desert fox dry. Captured German diaries later reveal the psychological toll. One Panzer officer records, "The English terrain is cursed, mines everywhere, even the wind hides them." Another notes that his division lost 2 days clearing a sector where no explosion ever came. By mid-October, the illusion reaches its peak. Dummy minefields merge with real ones until even British units struggle to tell them apart. In some sectors, tanks are routed along carefully charted safe lanes, known only to local sappers. The labyrinth is complete. Fletcher's men joke that if the war ever ends, they'll open a carnival. "Come see the invisible mines?" But the laughter hides exhaustion. They haven't slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks. Sand crusts their lips. The wind grinds it into their eyes. Still they work, driven by something deeper than orders. They know that soon thousands of men will fight across this very ground. If the deception holds, those men will live. If it fails, they will die. Bagnold visits the line on 18th of October, the eve of Montgomery's final preparations. He finds Fletcher sitting on an ammunition crate, sipping lukewarm tea, eyes hollow but steady. "Tomorrow night we begin," the major says. "I heard," Fletcher replies. "Let's hope the Germans believe what they see." "They will," Bagnold answers, "because what they see is belief." That night, a sandstorm sweeps across the front. It howls through the stakes and tins, blurring every edge. By morning, the fake fields look even more convincing. Half-buried, weather-scarred, ancient. Nature itself conspires in the illusion. When the first German patrols reappear, they find what looks like weeks of heavy mining activity. Engineers refuse to advance without clearance. By then, British artillery is already zeroed in. The deception works flawlessly. On 23 October 1942, Montgomery launches the Second Battle of El Alamein. The southern sector, thick with Fletcher's phantom fields, remains eerily quiet while the northern guns ignite the night sky. Rommel, deceived by reports of massive mine concentrations, holds his reserves in the wrong place. By the time he realizes the truth, the 8th Army has broken through. For the first time in the campaign, the British advance does not falter before the mines. They created their own walls, their own mirages, and let the enemy crash against them. Days later, as the tide of battle turns westward, Fletcher hears the news. Rommel is in retreat. The road to Libya lies open. Around him, the men cheer, laugh, weep. But he only sits on the sand, staring at the horizon where his ghostly minefields still lie untouched. He thinks of all the men who died clearing real mines earlier in the year, of the convoys stopped by fear, and of how something as small as an empty tin can change the path of history. Bagnold joins him, a faint smile beneath his dust-streaked face. "It seems," he says, "that imagination outruns steel after all." Fletcher nods. "Aye, sir. Maybe the desert was waiting for someone mad enough to believe that." As the sun sets, the wind lifts again, erasing the last marks of their labor. The minefields, real and false alike, disappear into the endless sea of sand. Only the results remain, Rommel's army in flight, and the memory of a war won not just by guns and courage, but by the simple genius of a mechanic who taught the desert how to lie. The guns fall silent, but the desert does not. Even after the last shells fade beyond the horizon, the wind keeps moving, sweeping over the dunes, smoothing away the tracks of war. The smell of cordite and oil lingers, faint as a ghost. It is November 1942, and the Second Battle of El Alamein is over. The Eighth Army has broken through. Rommel's Afrika Korps is in full retreat across Libya, leaving behind wrecked tanks, burnt convoys and minefields, real and imagined, that now belong to no one. For the first time since 1940, the British have turned the tide in North Africa. Churchill calls it the end of the beginning. Corporal Tommy Fletcher watches the victory unfold from the same barren ridge where his first phantom field once lay. The stakes are gone now, buried by drifting sand. Only memory marks the line between truth and illusion. He still finds it hard to believe that scraps of metal and paint helped shape a battle that changed the war. Yet the evidence is everywhere. Captured German maps label sectors as strongly mined, where no explosives ever existed. Prisoner interrogations confirm entire battalions halted for days, clearing empty ground. The deception drained Rommel's precious fuel, cost him time he could not spare, and forced him to fight blind. Fletcher's ghosts did their work perfectly. The Eighth Army pushes west toward Tripoli, their tanks rumbling across the same terrain that had once terrified them. Now it is the Germans who fear the ground. Even empty sand looks dangerous. A landscape once ruled by Rommel's aggression has turned against him. The desert he mastered now lies to him. Bagnold rides with the forward engineers, inspecting the aftermath. He looks older, the lines around his eyes carved deep by months of dust and worry. Yet his voice carries quiet pride. "You've seen it yourself," he tells Fletcher. "They fled from shadows. We turned the desert's emptiness into a fortress." Fletcher nods. "A fortress built on nothing." "Nothing can be powerful," Bagnold replies. "That's what the sand teaches. It holds its shape only when you stop fighting it." They both fall silent, watching an endless column of prisoners march east under guard. Among them are German pioneers, mine-laying specialists, staring grimly at the ground that betrayed them. They had been trained to trust the evidence of their eyes. The British taught them doubt. In Cairo, staff officers compile after-action reports. Figures appear in neat columns, sorties flown, shells fired, tanks destroyed. But nowhere in the ledgers is there space to record the measure of imagination. No medal citation mentions a mechanic who buried empty tins. The victories of deception belong to the shadows. Still the stories spread. Airmen speak of fields that weren't there. Infantrymen swear they watched enemy patrols halt at invisible barriers. One Australian gunner calls it the minefield of ghosts. The legend grows until no one knows where it began, only that it worked. Historians will later name it what it was, part of Operation Bertram, the greatest deception of the North African War. But for Fletcher, it remains something simpler, proof that fear is the most obedient soldier on any battlefield. He spends the last weeks of 1942 helping to clear the real mines, the cruel reminders beneath the illusion. Each one must be uncovered by hand, diffused with care. The irony does not escape him. "We built fake ones to save lives," he mutters, kneeling over a live charge. "Now we pull up the real ones to do the same." When he finishes, the desert is quiet again. The ground that once held death now holds nothing at all. The war moves north to Tunisia and Italy, but Fletcher's chapter ends here, under the same unending sky. Bagnold returns to scientific work after the campaign, studying wind, dust, and the physics of drifting sand. His research will later help NASA design Mars rovers, vehicles built to navigate another barren world. The lessons he learned here about motion, endurance, and deception outlast the war itself. As for Fletcher, no official record lists his invention. His name disappears into reports under headings like Royal Engineers, Miscellaneous Field Experiments. But among the men who served with him, the story endures. They remember the night he painted skulls on wooden stakes, the dawn when a German convoy turned back from an empty desert, the laughter that followed when they realized they had won with air and dust. Years later, veterans visiting El Alamein find the battlefield almost unchanged. The sand still shifts over forgotten craters. In the heat haze, they think they see the faint outline of stakes, maybe a line of markers half buried at the edge of sight. Most know it's just mirage, yet they pause anyway. The desert still plays its tricks. They remember a phrase Bagnold once wrote in his journal, "Imagination is ammunition." It had sounded poetic then, now it feels prophetic. For in the end, the North African campaign was not only a war of tanks and aircraft, it was a war of belief. It was fought in the human mind as fiercely as in the sand. Fletcher's fake minefields, those absurd creations of paint and nerve, proved that victory can come from what isn't there as much as from what is. And when the wind rises again, whispering across the dunes where the phantom fields once lay, it carries the faint rattle of empty tins. The sound fades quickly, lost in the immensity. But if you listen long enough, you can almost hear the echo of that strange truth discovered in 1942, that sometimes in war, nothing becomes the most powerful weapon of all.